have a question that seems to be repeated around the world in friends and family I have. So imagine like a young woman who's no longer as young anymore, and she's a lot more spiritual than her parents. She's very much into things that they might not understand. And her parents are very culturally Muslim, and they have their expectations of, what's wrong with you? All these perfectly nice young men are coming to ask for your hand in marriage. Why are you turning them down for reasons like, oh, he's not praying yet, he's not fasting yet? He'll change. Don't worry, you'll rub off on him, things like that. And she knows in her heart of hearts that she doesn't want to be a band-aid solution, but the pressure is on, and the years go by, and then she starts feeling like, maybe they're right, and then, you know what I mean? So it's all over the world, like Malaysia, Australia, everywhere. And the clock is ticking. So how does she balance that desire for a true husband, not just this guy who will come along and fit the box, while managing her parents' anxiety, and they're getting so much pressure from their community, So it's really tough. So I'd love to hear advice.
That is definitely perhaps the number one challenge for younger generations, right? And the thing is, we think it's unique in our time, but I would question whether it is. I think if we look at our history, our cultures and communities have always been evolving. So they've always been changed, and I'm sure there have always been generations who are telling their children, you need to maintain our traditions, and when the children are wanting to do something different. So therefore, I'm sure this is something we've forgotten about that already happened in the past. But of course, in our times now, I think the role of young men and women in particular is a little bit different, because increasingly we expect both the man and the woman to have a similar level of education, a similar professional life, and a similar sort of say in marital life. We're expecting this without really understanding what that means. And although I understand what you're saying from a woman's point of view, and I definitely think that globally in the Muslim world, there's a crisis as far as educated, professional, competent, religiously conscious Muslim women, let's say, are to find appropriate husbands who they feel compatible with. I think it's the same for the men too. Because talking to the men, in fact, what I would say with a lot of men, I've spoken to young men who are, let's say, I put a question on Facebook a month or so back. If you're a young man, if you're a man over 30 and not married, what's the reason? I said it in a nice way, I'd really be interested in knowing what's the reason. Of course, the women replied first, as always. But then there were men who were brave enough to respond. And I just want to add here, women have to give space to hear the men. What happens is, because we're feeling it so intensely, and men are a bit casual about it, we say, but this is what we want you to do, this is how it is, and we sort of impose on them this intense expectation, and the men say, whoa, this is not how you can't speak for me, and this is not how I feel it, this is not what I want. So it's been a challenge for me over the years to also hear what the men are saying. They are not necessarily saying something different from us, but they say it in a totally different way, perhaps. And this is where communication comes, is that we have to not misinterpret what each other says. Hear what that person is saying in the way they say it. Try to understand it for what they're saying. And a lot of young men are also there. What they're saying, the root of it, they're actually afraid. The root, if you dig deep, why aren't you? The response that the men were given is that the women had these unreasonable expectations. They're making these demands, and they're saying this, and they come up with this list of things. And if you're going to marry, then you're going to do this, you're going to do this. They put all these cards on the table, and the man says, "Whoa, this is too heavy." They don't want that kind of heaviness to start off a marital relationship. So men are also. We can say that maybe men benefit because you get a single man in the room and everybody's saying, oh, let's find him a wife, right? They're like gold dust, single unmarried men, okay? So therefore, but I think men are also afraid. They're afraid because, from what often the men have said, when they see these independent women, I said, look, what's wrong? Why can't you feel like, about marrying someone like this and something like that. They say, well, yeah, those sort of women, they're high maintenance. I've heard this often by lots of men. And what do they, I said, okay, what do you mean by high maintenance? It's because it means that they have to think. It means there's an expectation for them to be actively involved in the relationship, when in past generations, they didn't. They benefited from a relationship of being cared for and taken care of. The woman accepted all the conditions of being the server, the person who served, right? And I'm not against women serving. So to say that, all I'm saying is service comes two ways. We know the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in his home, saying that Aisha would say, was asked, what did he do? He was in service of his family. So service is not just a women's thing, it's a two-way thing. So men, I think, find the way women communicating a bit intimidating. That's my own view. Men can contradict me if they like on that, but that's what I found. And they think that this, because what happens instinctively for a woman, my theory is, and many studies have written in similar thing, is that a woman, even if she's not aware of it, instinctively she's looking for somebody who can give her safety and security. Because when she's having children, she wants to be safe. Right? She wants her children to be safe. And men, what they look for initially, they want to feel that this woman, they want to take care of this woman. They want to be able to care for her and be the carer and like the sort of a compassionate way of care for the woman. And we often jump down each other's throats when it comes down to expressing these things. Because modern woman says, you know, when the man says he wants to protect her, I can protect myself, I can do this, I can do that. So therefore the conversation dies. Right, it's dead, you won't even go there. Right? So the men say, if you want that kind of equality, then okay, then I'll find somebody else. So therefore men have this instinctive need to feel that they are their wife's hero. Right? They need to feel that this woman, regardless of their qualification, regardless of whatever, they want to feel the man, the woman sees him as her hero. Right? And we have to be conscious of women as saying, are we preventing that from happening? By putting too much on the table, having expectations which are perhaps need to be a slow burn in the relationship, rather gung-ho right at the beginning. Right? And what I would also say, just to finish on this thing, is what I have found for both men and women, but more so with women, if you look at what their insecurities, both the unmarried and married, at the root of the things that they can't handle in a relationship is a real sense of primordial low self-esteem. I don't know if I can explain this adequately, what that means. I mean that we have all these veneers of competence, our education, our professions, but we don't feel valued. We're not feeling, either through our family upbringing, or the society around us, or the way the legal system works, or something. We don't feel, as a woman, let's say, we don't feel valued. And men, for their own reasons, if you dig deep, they also don't feel valued in the world that we live in today. So if we're really saying that we recognize, like I said earlier, we have a macro-micro crisis, and beyond our personal relationships, this is a bigger problem, right? How are we going to do something to change that? We need to be pioneers in a different way of behaving with each other, right? But we have to recognize it first, right? That's what I think.
No, I think, sorry, 1 minute. Just sister, I think there's a problem about supply and demand. Okay?
Don't go where I think you're going with that.
The problem is when you do a job specification, we want a particular kind of woman and women want particular kind of men. The problem is we are not producing en masse the kind of men our women want, and we're not producing the kind of women that our modern men want. Here, for the first time in this evening, and only for the third time in my marriage, I'll disagree with my wife. Is that the boys that we have today, most of them irresponsible, not having the ability to be sensitive, not good at communication, are the product of mothers. They spend a lot of mothers. So this tarbiyah, see, when you talk about marriage in Islam, in the traditional societies, it's very important that you marry from your social class. There's nothing about the situation is that if you marry somebody from your social class, they normally do get the same kind of tarbiyah. The tarbiyah is much more than just knowing about theology and stuff, but it's the adab, the akhlaq, about how you do behave to your mother-in-law, your sisters, your thing, the whole kind of thing. Now we live in this interdependent global world. The chances that you're not going to marry somebody from your own background is very, very high. So the thing that you're going to marry most probably is if you're an accountant, you'll marry another accountant. Or if you're an IT person, you'll marry an IT person or in that field, because we meet mostly through work or because we like Mukha cafe. So you meet somebody, the only thing starting point is you like the same cup of coffee. It's a very bad start in life. So we need now to relook about what this building of character and people. Because if that is there at the core, if the structure of the building or the component, the good car, the Toyota, the Honda, has got a good framework, then the color, the seats, whether they're leather or not, there is air condition, is important, but not so important as the basic structure. So myself, I have a daughter and a son.
So do I.
Yeah, okay, we have that. And I always look at them as an example. It's a very good measurement of your own success as a marriage, how much of it you have impinged. It's not only that they actually inherit not only your DNAs, but also your idiosyncrasies in a relationship. You know, they are affected subliminally. They see these kind of things. It's very, very important about that. But what is important then, you find that coming here, I had a week alone with my daughter. Though we live in the same city, we never get so much chance to be so close. But here, coming and staying with her, of course, for the father, the daughter is something special. The daughter is what the wife would always like to be treated like. The daughter, they never get the treatment. And the father has got something special about the daughter because they have no expectations from the daughter. You love them for what they are. It doesn't matter. But for the bloody wife, you want something in exchange, at least a hot meal or something like that. So this, I'm talking about this really, for me, my own personal observances. That I'm thinking, if somebody wants, I want my children to get married. What is it that you would recommend about them? It's difficult. They are socializing animals. I myself know a lot of people and stuff like that. In a way, you feel that the boy, the son, somehow I feel can, because it's the power of politics, the reality about the situation. As a man, he can, to a certain extent, make changes and determine a relationship. But it's my daughter that I'm worried about. You see that how much do we create the safety nets around her? And it's a struggle. How do you vet a man who comes to marry my daughter? What are the kind of questions that I would like them to be answered? These are really strange. And in the traditional societies, and it should be part of our situation, is very, very important, is that people get married in a context, legitimacy. That the man who comes to propose is asked the right questions and being put in the right context of what is expected of them before marriage. A lot of the good things in marriage, you have to do it before marriage. Once you're in a situation of marriage, the thing is gone. I'm not sure myself if there's an answer for this, because we're living as migrant communities in the West. A lot of you might be living in Malaysia, but you are coming from all kinds of places and meeting people in Cape. So we have to create this kind of system. It's a new one. You know, how we make people accountable, how we set the scenario before they get married. You know, when they're there, they fall like crazily in love, because nowadays they determine, they go and watch a movie and they think they're, you know, some of them think they're Spider-Man, some they think they're Hulk, some of them whatever. Then they think they want to watch Indian film, they want to start singing Indian songs. So they're all affected by all kinds of stimuli, you see. But marriage is a really hardcore, practical kind of arrangement. So all that has to be. So I don't think that there's anybody can give solution. But what you can do, you can set processes that can determine some of this beforehand. You know, so you need, like Humera was saying, and we always say this. There's so much planning goes into the wedding, but very little into the marriage. People want to know what food is going to eat, what dress is going to wear, and mashallah, the flowers looked good. The bride, did you see the long robe and stuff? You know, and when the wedding finished, you know, the couple suddenly, they were surrounded by this nice celebrity status. Suddenly they are alone, the two of them. So the minute the crowd leaves, they start hating each other, because they're used by surrounding and doing things. So it's a good question. And this time bomb thing is the thing. I have a niece who is in his mid-30s, I think, or something. We basically decided that marriage is not for them. Now, in this modern world, you have to think about alternative ways there's not one way of getting married. There are so many varieties. You marry outside your culture. Now there's a big trend in the West. You want to marry outside of your religion. And you're making people come up questions that you want to make choices between my happiness and my religion. There shouldn't be a choice. So all these young people are going to come up with these questions, and we need to be prepared. Our scholars, our activists, and us as parents need to be able to sit down and think instead of being hysterical about it. You see, because like you say, marriage is more just the wedding ceremonies. They're still, going on.
Can I focus on one aspect which I'd like us
I'd like to have one last word on one subject.
You have your last word.
Bloody hell. What too close.
I thought, since it hasn't been brought up, I mean, one of the things that I keep going on about, actually, is the lack of, the issue about Muslim men, actually, and the lack of support for Muslim men, right? I always say, as a woman, I really can't speak on behalf of Muslim men. I only have an opinion from the outside, right? And from things I see, from people I speak to. And I don't think as a woman either it's for me to force the solution. I think men have to do it themselves, right? Men have to find ways to recognize there's a crisis amongst many of our men, both young and older men. Men often have it as a midlife crisis and get up to all sorts of things, and younger men something else. And I think some of the stuff why we started doing work on Muslim fatherhood in London was because we found that there were all these sort of fracturing in our communities, and we were saying, we were trying to investigate, okay, what are the weak points? What can we try to bolster up to strengthen our family structures and our relationships? And one of the things that kept coming up in some focus groups that we did, the young people and the women, was the role of men, the role of the husbands and the fathers, and the lack of presence of the men in the family life basically. So therefore, what the women were saying is that when we asked them the question, what do you as a woman need for yourself to feel better in yourself and to get on with your life? They didn't focus on themselves. They said, if somebody could speak to my husband, to communicate to him that, this is something that I need him to understand, or to say, if somebody could find a job for my husband, or I need somebody to communicate to my husband to help him communicate better with children. This is what the women were saying. What they needed to feel happy in themselves as a starter was some of these things with the men to be resolved. And then when you speak to the young boys, right, you find we've done some projects with young men in London, and what you find is that they are going, particularly in that we did a project with 13 to 15-year-olds and 16 to 19-year-olds, young men. And they're very volatile at that age. And often what happens at this age, people don't focus on young men. You know, there are hardly any male mentors for these young men who they can look up to. And sadly, what they tend to have as role models are men who are either in polygamous situations or treating his wife badly. Those are the only visible role models they have, right? So therefore, where are the men who are seeing a young person and, okay, they don't have to treat each other like we as women treat each other, but go and bring that man, young boy, into your world in a good way. And you don't even have to talk religion all the time, because religion is everything, right? There's no differentiation between here and here what religion is. So just bring them in, make them feel good, support them, train them in some way, and see, and like I said earlier about career, like in our household, as a married couple, we have a lot of young people coming in, because the situation in Britain is different, because we're fractured families and everything, and diaspora communities. A lot of people come into our homes, particularly young men, to give them a context where Fuad then has a role, just as a friend, just somebody to talk to, right? Just somebody that doesn't always, when he meets these young, is not lecturing him all the time. And often Fuad tells silly jokes and all that kind of stuff, isn't it? So, so to break the ice with these men, to give these men the space that there's a man who's older than them that they can go to. And then what happens eventually, we start telling them their issues, whatever there is. And they need a responsible male response. They're not going to hear it from a woman. I mean, sometimes they do need that too, but in principle, they need a man who they can trust their emotions with, right? So I think that we have to look at this really seriously, this question, because it creates lots of levels of vulnerability in our men, which can manifest itself at different points in life. Because it could be the moment when 10 years down the line in marriage, the couple are busy trying to make money to pay the rent, and the man feels frustrated and he becomes violent. He wasn't at the beginning of the marriage, but because he can't express himself, because he hasn't got anybody else to talk to, he either emotionally abuses the woman by verbally saying horrible things to her, or he becomes physically violent, right? So therefore, there are lots of things which are results of the inability to communicate and to feel good about yourself. So I really think, I wish what I would message to people here in Malaysia and around the Muslim world is men need to be around each other and bring particularly younger generation in and be there for them. And I think this is one of the key things in order to strengthen families, right? And for example, like in our house, people see us arguing all the time. We're not arguing in a bad way, but we disagree on lots of things. So part of the thing about seeing us disagree, we were in a conversation last night when we were disagreeing with each other. But what people need to see, marriage doesn't need to be perfect. What they see is that he thinks this, I think that, we disagree with it, but at the end of the day we're okay. Right? That's what people need to see, I think, in a relationship. And I'd like to see men much more active in that.